Good evening. It is 6:03 p.m. and I will now call the Affordability Committee meeting to order. This meeting is being held in person and electronically in accordance with the Municipal Act. There are two public meetings being held this evening. If you are joining the meeting virtually and have not yet registered and wish to speak, please email cityclerks@barrie.ca or call 705-739-4220 extension 5500. And staff will send you the information required to participate virtually. Tonight's applications were submitted by the developers and deemed complete under the Planning Act to proceed with a public meeting. The first public meeting is to review applications for an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment submitted by the Biglieri Group Limited on behalf of Brown Bear Developments Inc. for lands known municipally as 901 Essa Road. The second public meeting is to review applications for a zoning law amendment and draft plan of subdivision submitted by the Jones Consulting Group Limited on behalf of Bay Lane Estates Company Limited for lands known municipally as 101 to 119 Bay Lane. Members of the Affordability Committee will be listening to the presentations and comments received during the public meetings, but will not be making comments or debating the items tonight. Committee members will have an opportunity to provide comments when the staff reports are considered by general committee at a later date. The purpose of a public meeting is to provide the public an opportunity to give comments on the development applications. Members of the public providing comments are asked to keep their comments to under 5 minutes to allow time for others wishing to speak. Any questions asked by the public will be noted by staff and the applicants. Any responses to the questions will be addressed in the staff reports presented at a later date. Ward councillors will have an opportunity to ask questions of staff and questions of clarification to allow for questions to be asked on behalf of residents unable to attend the meeting. Other committee members, including myself, can ask questions of staff by email after the meeting. Interested persons wishing notification of the staff report should sign the notification form located on the table at the back of the council chambers or email cityclerks@barrie.ca. Michelle Banfield, Director of Development Services, would you please confirm that the notifications were conducted in accordance with the Planning Act for tonight's public meetings?
Yes, Chair Nixon, it was.
Thank you. I will now call upon Michael Testaguza of the Biglieri Group Limited to provide the presentation concerning an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendments for lands known municipally as 901 Essa Road. Good evening.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Michael Testaguza from the Biglieri Group, here representing the owners of 901 Essa Road, as well as Block 281 in the former Criston subdivision. With me online to answer any clarification questions, I believe, are also the architectural consultant, Clifford from Kirkor Architecture, as well as our transportation consultant, Calvin from ACOM. So very quickly, what I intend to cover today, we will start with an overview of the subject site, move through the planning context that underpins the development concept, move into the development concept itself, providing some clarity for members of the committee as well as obviously members of the community. A quick discussion of the following planning processes and the next steps therein. And then, of course, listen to any commentary that comes through the process tonight. I'd like to make it clear to members of the committee as well as the community that a development application obviously requires the input of a wide-reaching consultant team. And we've listed that consultant team here. But importantly, for members of the community especially, if they do want to access any of those reports, I do want to make myself available in order to provide those materials and help explain them as we move forward. So we'll now go into a discussion of the proposal, starting with the subject site. You'll notice here on the screen, the site is broken up into two different parcels. The first being 901 Essa Road, located at the northwest corner of Essa and Salem. And the second being what's known as Block 201 from the former Criston subdivision, which is located at the northeast corner of Brown Bear Street and Salem Road. Currently, the properties are vacant. If anyone's been by there recently, I do want to point out that there was a single detached home at 901 SR Road that was demolished pursuant to permits issued by the city. And so accordingly, that aerial image is a little bit dated at this point. With respect to the project site, I won't belabor this point. Members of the community, I'm sure, are very well aware of what is in their own community, so I'll be very brief in this regard. To the north are existing four-story condominium apartment buildings. To the east is a church. To the south, a landscaping yard for Unilock. And to the west, two-story townhomes. From a planning perspective, we start off at a high level with the very official plan and the designation of mixed-use nodes and corridors. When this application came in, the 2018 official plan was still in effect. And very much that policy framework, as well as the updated policy framework, directs for mixed-use buildings. And in fact, encourages them in these designations. And that includes high-density residential mixed-use buildings. The Salem secondary plan provides a bit more specific context for the development of the site, designating the site as ESSA Salem mixed-use node. The policy framework directs that the highest densities and intensities be located at the intersection of ESSA and Salem, and does permit, again, for and encourage mixed-use high-density development, which frames the two streets in this instance. This is the policy document that does provide context with respect to maximum densities. There is no maximum height, but maximum density of 2.5 FSI and 140 units per hectare. Moving along from a zoning perspective, interestingly, the site is split zoned. So 901 SR Road is designated pursuant to the Innisfil zoning bylaw still, and is rural residential. Whereas the western portion, having gone through the Chris Down approval processes, is designated neighborhood mixed use. So over the fullness of time, of course, the intention of the zoning application is to bring the full property into the neighborhood mixed use designation, which does permit for, again, high density residential development, does provide direction with respect to height and density of 2.5 FSI and 12 stories. So that policy context, direction for a mixed use high density development informs where the application's gone to date. This is an image of the architectural plan, again, from a plan view, so an aerial view. I'll quickly go over the key stats of the application, and then we'll move into kind of a more thematic review of the proposal. So the proposal includes two 15-story towers connected by a 3-story podium, which results in 425 residential units, including 10 live work units. Also includes a commercial component at grade, and 425 parking spaces total. The site organization is on the slide that you see before you now. And this has kind of been thematically produced to assist members of the public in understanding the various elements on that admittedly incredibly complicated architectural drawing. So the dark blue elements here are the 15-story towers. You see them located at the two intersections. The lighter blue is the 3-story podium. And you'll notice how that frames both ESSA, Salem, and Brown Bear. And then what you see are various lines along the outside of the building. Those lines are showing you the different uses at grade. So along Brown Bear, you'll notice a pink line, which is showing you the location of the retail commercial uses. At the corner of ESSA and Salem, you notice a orange line. Sorry, I almost forgot what color that was. Which is where the live work units are located. And then the remainder you'll notice is predominantly yellow, which are grade related residential units. So what you see in this is that you really have a proposal that's framing all sides of it, keeping eyes on all of the spaces, animating them, and also providing for retail and live work uses. You'll also notice, of course, that there's parking at grade tucked behind the building, so it's not visible from the streetscapes. But does provide for convenience parking for the retail and live work units, as well as a component of the planned commercial, visitor parking. The other important thing to note on this is the east side of the site in gray, a lighter gray. That is the road widening that's being required in order to facilitate the roundabout at ESSA and Salem Road. So that's actually 23 meters in width. So a significant portion of the site is actually being conveyed over to the city to facilitate that roundabout. And again, if you think of FSI in terms of a math equation, losing that portion of the site drives the FSI of the site up significantly compared to if it was still in the property. So here we see an elevation shot. And what that is for members of the public, in essence, is a side view of the building. And there's a couple of important facets to point out here. So again, we thematically colored this up. The podium is the 3-story cyan color, if I can say that. And what you see here is that a majority of the building's frontage is actually composed of that 3-story podium element, which is in keeping with, of course, the height of the apartments to the north and the surrounding townhouses. And then you have step back from those two 15-story tower elements. Important to note here is the separation distance between those two towers. So it's 42 meters, which is far above what industry standard separation distance is nowadays. And they're on two 850-meter floor plates, which are relatively slim when compared to the towers of days gone by. What that results in is really access to sky views and limited shadow impacts as a result of, again, that large separation and those smaller floor plates, which is, again, more or less an industry standard nowadays. With respect to circulation and access, again, we've thematically colored this one up. The orange is showing you the pedestrian routes. In essence, they encompass the entire building because, again, the base of the building is primarily activated in that regard. You also notice that the vehicular access is off of Brown Bear in this instance, per policy direction, taking our direction, of course, from the official plan with respect to locating accesses on the lowest order streets. Moving on, with respect to landscape amenities, I do want to spend a second here. This is, again, another aerial shot, but what we're doing now is taking out and really popping the landscape amenity as well as the amenity areas themselves. So the primary amenity area for this building is located between the two towers on the 3rd-story podium. So again, located as far away from the adjacent residential uses as can be, but also in a really good location with respect to access to sunlight for those future amenities users. And what you have on the northern wings of each of the towers there are much smaller amenity areas meant to handle a lot less with respect to use and people. And then again, along the northern property line, you see the proposal to have significant tree plantings along that boundary to provide some additional privacy between the two uses. Although I will note that, you know, it really is in that northern area, a relationship of a parking lot, primarily to a parking lot with respect to the apartment uses to the north. What I'll do now is I'm just going to quickly flip through a couple of images that have been produced. This is an image looking southwest, or sorry, it is the southwest facade of the building. It's looking northeast. And what you'll see here in the background are those 4-story and 2-story townhouse and apartment uses. You can also see the amenity space we were talking about located centrally there, as well as you can see the intention there. The buildings are chamfered at the corners to provide for public squares, kind of at the two intersections, so to speak. But also you'll notice that the buildings themselves have some articulation to them, even in the massing. So they're not simple boxes put onto a podium. They were designed intentionally to kind of use the site and take their cues from the site, but provide visual interest as well. Moving on, this is an image looking at the northeast portion of the subject site. What you can notice here, and it comes out better when you're looking at the actual paper, is the intention to animate the streetscapes there, specifically with the treatments along there. And also you can see how the parking is really tucked in behind there, and you'll see that better on the next image as well. This is looking south. So your north image. And again, you'll see the parking tucked away in the back there. At the far bottom right corner, you'll see actually the entrances to the underground garage and how those have been located internally to the building rather than being again, of days gone by, separate ramps into the mixed use building. And again, you'll see that central amenity space and those two smaller wings to the north side of the site. So with respect to the planning applications that are currently before the city at this point, we have official plan amendment application in to increase the FSI to 3.2, as well as increase the units per hectare to 480. I've already put in my small plug about the fact that a large portion of land is being taken from the frontage to facilitate the roundabout. But that's not necessarily the only reason to intensify in these locations. The city is putting significant resources through their official plan and other planning documents into providing bus routes down ESSA, into providing cycle routes in the future down ESSA, and in fact, upgrading the intersection of ESSA and Salem itself, which I understand from our traffic reports and anecdotal evidence is somewhat of a problem already. So there's all this investment into that community, which directs for the intensification in essence that is being proposed at this point. With respect to the zoning bylaw amendment, the redesignation of 901 to neighborhood mixed use is in keeping with the official plan, obviously, but we do have further amendments to that neighborhood mixed use zone. And admittedly, I've mentioned them already. It's the height to 15 stories, the FSI increase from 2.5 to 3.2, the decrease in parking requirements, which we haven't spoken about much to this point. The requirement is for 1.5. The request is for 1 per unit. And again, this aligns with the fact that it is an intensification corridor. Bus transit and cycling transit is being brought down. And one of the best ways to make use of that infrastructure, actually the strongest TDM, transportation demand measure you can have, is not having parking spaces. If people have parking spaces, they tend to drive. So one of the strongest TDM measures you can propose is that reduction. We have heard the commentary from the neighborhood on that in that regard. And so what we are undertaking to do between now and a go forward basis is conduct proxy surveys of other similar apartment buildings in the city to try to get an understanding of functionally how many parking spaces are being used in a select few buildings, which we'll determine in consultation with staff to make sure it's an apples to apples comparison. And we'll review that rate in light of that and kind of as well as in light of obviously any additional commentary we received tonight. And there may be further refinement as we go forward. With regards to future applications, should the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment be successful, there will be future site plan applications to provide further details with respect to landscaping, building design, engineering design and grading, as well as draft plan of condominium, as this is purported to be condominium tenure, not rental tenure. So with respect to next steps, we've done the community meeting, happened on March 9th. We're going to take in additional input, obviously, from the community tonight and hopefully clarify any questions that have come in the interim. We'll then work with staff to further refine the proposal, not only based on their comments, but obviously based on the feedback we've heard from the community. And then we will proceed to a second submission and work through the process through the normal means until we hopefully have an application that satisfies everyone. So with that, I'm here for any questions you may have.
Seeing none. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. I will now call upon Logan Jeffermans, planner with the Development and Services Department of the City of Barrie, to provide an update on the status of the applications.
Thank you, Chair Nixon and members of Affordability Committee that are here today. So further to Mr. Testaguza's presentation. Please be advised that planning staff are currently completing that technical review that he spoke about, and as is standard as part of this application. That neighborhood meeting that was held on March 9th had 40 residents and the ward councillor which attended that meeting. Some of the feedback which was received at that point in time included visual impact and sunlight loss for residents in the apartment buildings to the north. Questions about building height with 15 stories being seen as too tall. Noise concerns during the multi-year construction schedule for this application. Noise impacts from the outdoor amenity areas or balconies on adjacent landowners. Traffic impacts upon Brown Bear Street, Coda Street, Salem Road, or Essa Road. Limited visitor parking resulting in overflow parking on adjacent streets, as I think has already been mentioned is the case with some of the existing developments. Additional parking for commercial uses being needed as well. In addition, the need for earlier timing and delivering infrastructure, including parks, roads, and transit to this area. So staff have taken all of that in, as has the applicant been made aware of that. And we're currently reviewing the appropriateness of the application for compliance with the provincial policy and the city's official of the proposed infill development, given surrounding development and residents, as well as considering the infrastructure development in that area and ensuring that the analysis of these considerations and the official plan and site-specific zoning provision amendments is currently under review by staff and will be brought forward to general committee in the near term, likely this fall. So next steps, staff will continue to work with the applicant to address feed through this public consultation process, as well as from the previous neighborhood meeting, as well as comments raised through the analysis of these applications by technical staff and our agency partners. These items may require revisions or updates to these plans and reports submitted in support of this application, and a staff report providing a recommendation to the general committee on the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment application would be anticipated to be brought forward in late 2023. Plan of condominium application would not require staff recommendation to council, and it is anticipated that the majority of detailed design and technical matters would then be addressed through the site plan control process. Prior to wrapping up, I'd just like to remind the Affordability Committee and members of the public as well that are here today that all submission materials and key dates associated with this application are available online for viewing on the city's development projects webpage under Ward 7. Alternatively, you may contact myself, the file manager, Logan Jeffermans, directly. Thank you again. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to address those at this time or following comments from the public.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to provide comments? If so, please approach the podium and begin by stating your first and last name and your address for the record.
Yes, very small comments. Are you talking about unit built with wood, concrete, a mix of both of them? Is the unit you're talking about, are there a mix of concrete or wood? There's a lot of wooden four-story in Barrie. I would like to know that. We have a fire hazard right now that is going on, and some other issues just like mice. So I'd like to know what kind of structure you want to raise.
Thank you, sir. We didn't get your name and address for the record.
Since we haven't got any pictures, any plans, anything to build question on about, so I'm just throwing it like that. My name is Mary Titus, Donald Street, Barrie.
Thank you. I will ask if we have anyone in the waiting room that would like to join us virtually. We do not. I'll now ask Ward 7 Councillor Harvey, do you have any questions of clarification?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Nixon. Most of my questions will be for the applicant, so I don't know if you want to come back up to the podium.
Certainly.
When I see in one of the reports, obviously it wasn't really highlighted too much in your presentation. There's a proposed that all the trees on the property are going to be removed due to it conflicting with where the construction needs to take place. And a row of trees are going to be put along the fence line. Now, would you anticipate that those trees are going to be fairly mature? Because we're dealing with a 6-story apartment building behind this potential 18-story structure.
So I can definitely look into that. The specifications of the trees would typically be determined through site plan, but that's not to say, I think the comment is well taken. We certainly haven't specified that as of yet. It won't be a transplanting of the existing trees. So they will be newer trees, they'll be nursery stock, but there are various sizes of nursery stock you can get. So I, not being a landscape architect, I can't tell you, what the height or caliper size would be, but we can take that back in and perhaps get that information sooner than otherwise would be, because I understand the point would be that it will provide some screening, especially for the outdoor amenity space that's located kind of in the southeast corner of that apartment complex. And that might be a place to pay some particular attention to that matter.
Okay. And when it comes to the decreased amenity space, I also don't see that anywhere there's any indication of a playground or anything of this sort. And the reason I'm asking this question is this has become an issue within this subdivision, because right now the only playground is at the condos directly behind this property. That is not for the use of all the single and towns that are in that same Bear Creek subdivision. And when a school with a playground is going to come, time still to tell. But there is a spot for it just in behind to the west. Is there any intent? Probably going to be dealing with many young families moving into this structure.
So we can definitely look at programming. I mean, the amenity space between the two towers that's on that 3rd story is certainly large enough to accommodate that. So it's something we can take into consideration with respect to that. With respect to the community at large, I mean, there's a little bit of a tension there. One of the things we've heard is provide parking for the retail uses. And of course, that's important. And I think ideally you'd want that parking space to be at grade, which is where we've put it at this time. So, there's a bit of a tension, an at grade play area there, gives one thing, takes away another, right? So, but could be, and theoretically it would remain private. Although again, that could be discussed as we kind of move along forward. But the point is, I think that there'll be a lot of new families coming to this development itself. And so at a minimum, we need to think about that in programming amenities.
Great. And then on slide 4, it shows the red property line stopping just before Brown Bear. Now, is that because there's a right of way, or are there future towns going to be built there? And the reason I'm asking this is some of the reports that are contained with your submissions do show towns there. However, some of your other images of this structure shows that there's a sidewalk going right to the edge of Brown Bear. So I'm just wanting some clarity on that.
Do we by chance have that slide? Just so I can, I just want to make sure I'm referencing it properly, and my computer shut me out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so if you see the red line, and then there's obviously some space before you actually get to Brown Bear. Now, is that a right of way, or will there be towns there at some point just to the west of that red line before you get to Brown Bear?
Understood. So we're talking about the area that has that block 281.
Yes.
Yes. So that's actually the combined site includes 901 SR Road and block 281. So there will be no towns there. And the proposal you've been seeing as we flip through the slides includes that portion of the land as well. So it does immediately abut Brown Bear Street.
Okay. Now, when it comes to the shadow studies, obviously, there's going to be some impact on the towns that are on the west side of Brown Bear at certain times of the day where they're completely covered in shadowing. If you were to decrease this by a few stories to stay within the 12 stories, do you know what the impact would be to that shadowing? Would it be significant enough to make a difference to those towns? Or is that something that you may not have looked at this point?
We can look at it for sure. And I'll take that into consideration. Read 12 stories. Sorry, excuse me while I make my note. But I'll say high level. My initial knee-jerk reaction is that shadows tend to be longer in the morning and in the afternoon for obvious reasons. And as a result, you tend to have your longest shadows in the morning and the afternoon. So a reduction from 12, if I recall the shadow studies correctly, the shadows go well beyond the townhouse buildings. So building an as of right 12 building, my knee-jerk reaction is that the impact on those townhomes for the, roughly 2 hours in the morning for any given unit would probably still be there with a 12-story building, just given that those are the longer shadows. You'd likely see more of a reduction on immediate properties in terms of the afternoon or middle of the day, sorry, when you're seeing the shadows going directly north because they're shorter shadows. So pulling them back a bit incrementally might actually pull them off. But again, when you looked at those shadows, they weren't particularly impactful on actually the neighboring uses to the north. Because again, shadows are shorter and at midday. Knee-jerk reaction, but we can look at the 12-story and have a comparative information available in the future.
And then just one thing I want to clarify about the parking. So you had said that 1.5 is what is expected. However, you're requesting 1. When I read what's been posted, 1 is actually what's mandatory, and you're requesting 0.85.
I
just want a little bit of clarity on that because I'm reading
Yeah.
one thing, but you said something different.
No, fair enough. And maybe I don't know if I can defer that question because my understanding was that it was 1 per unit that was required and that we were or 1.5 was required per unit everywhere outside of the downtown. And the downtown has a standard of 1, and that the proposal is for 1, which is a blended rate between visitor and residential. But I stand to be corrected. So maybe a question for staff if I can put it on.
Through you, Chair Nixon, I can confirm that yes, it's a little bit buried in some of the wording, but the mixed use standard is 1 parking space per dwelling unit. And I think the application as proposed has spoken to 0.85 per dwelling unit, as Councillor Nix or Harvey has mentioned.
Okay, I stand to be corrected. My apologies.
Great, thank you. And just one last one, and I may have missed this in your presentation while I was writing. What is the setback between your structure and the property line where the fence is from the existing buildings that are to the north?
So the setback between the structures, I believe, is over 20 meters. The setback from the 4-story element at the northeast corner where it's closest, I believe is just over 6. The tower element I have on my computer that shut me out. I can provide all that information to you though.
Okay, great. My next couple of questions are for staff. So during the presentation, it was spoken about this being a 15-story building. But this is sitting on a 3-story podium. do we then not consider that this is an 18-story structure? And then the other part of my question is, the utility space on the top of the roof looks like it might be another story and a half or so. And how does that come into account when we count our true stories that this building actually is?
Through you, Chair Nixon, I can confirm that it's been interpreted as a 15-story building with the 3 stories incorporated within that. So therefore 12 stories beyond the initial 3. We're still talking about 15 stories total. The mechanical is looked at generally as not being counted as stories for those purposes. So it's something that we definitely need to look into when it comes to the total height of the building, because they definitely appear large in a lot of the drawings.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for the clarity. I didn't sit there and count how many stories and stuff, but it was a little confusing when you're talking 15 and then another 3. So I was looking at this as being 18 stories. And then just one other question. When it comes to the timeline around widening Essa Road and also completing this proposed roundabout at Essa and Salem, what is the timeline with that? And what is the anticipated timeline with this development in construction and move-in dates? Is this aligned, or are we going to be off by a year or 2?
Through you, Chair Nixon. Through an infrastructure project EN 1276, there has been some funding committed to initial design for redesign of Essa Road towards Salem. That involves the roundabout, it involves some sidewalks and other active transportation improvements along Essa. The budgeting for that, I think, is out to 2031 and beyond at this stage, whereas this application is talking about being completed by 2027. So there's a little bit of a disparity in that timing.
Okay, great. And actually, just one last question that I'm going to ask, and it's to get some clarity from Mr. Titus. I believe I know the answer because of the height. It's going to have to be concrete, but if you can just clarify that, please.
Oh, is that for me? Oh, certainly. I believe you're correct. Again, we don't typically specify kind of the construction material at this point. We don't really have structural consultants on until a little bit later on, but given the height, I would strongly suspect that to be the case.
Just to provide a little further clarity then, can someone tell me what the maximum height is when you can use wood product?
We may be able to defer to other experts in the field. Generally, it's around 6 stories for Ontario, although that is changing a little bit with some changes to the building code I'm aware of. So laminate woods and things can go a little bit higher at times, but 6 stories generally.
Yeah, no, the reason I'm asking is I know we did have one come forward that was 10 stories and they were talking about wood construction, and I just wasn't sure if 10 was the ceiling or not, because before 6 used to be the ceiling.
Changes every day.
Those are all my questions. Thank you for your presentation. And I will say overall, I do like the cosmetic look of it. And obviously the residents have their concerns that we can kind of work through to see where we get.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. If anyone has any further written comments, you can submit them to Logan Jeffermans at logan.jeffermans@barrie.ca. I will now call upon Ray Duhamel of the Jones Consulting Group Limited to provide a presentation concerning a zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision for lands known municipally as 101 to 119 Bay Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be back in this chambers. It's been quite a while for me. I've been doing all of these meetings via Zoom, so it's a pleasure to see some great faces again. Presentation up on the screen. This is an interesting site, and I'll get into it in a few minutes. It actually is, we're proposing a number of applications, but there's no physical construction, no infrastructure, and no development proposed as a consequence, other than the technical terminology of development under the context of the Planning Act. So my name is Ray Duhamel with the Jones Consulting Group. I'm presenting this evening on behalf of Bay Lane Estates Limited, and they own lands known as 101 to 119 Bay Lane. All right. So for context, I think you can see actually, I'm going to point to this one. I can only point to one, and I generally make it a habit when I'm standing here, I've forgotten that I always use the ward counselor as my benchmark on which side. So that means, unfortunately, Councillor Reitman is going to have to crane his neck a little bit when I'm pointing. But this is Bay Lane right here, and Hurst Drive is just down on the bottom, and Brennan Avenue over here. And this land all throughout here is known as the Gables Park. So this is the primary and only access to the site is along Bay Lane, which is a municipal road that traverses down to the waterfront. And this is the property itself, as you can see in this triangular shape. This is a little bit more zoomed in, and you can see that the property contains 9 single detached dwellings. And then there's outbuildings and some structures along the shoreline, and there's some tennis courts and other facilities in the actual property itself. And then there's a primary access road that's connected right through here. And about 5 years ago, the city of Barrie installed a water main and a sanitary sewer line through the lots off of Brennan right through this area. And it ultimately went all the way over to the Royal Oak Drive subdivision, which is over here, to provide sanitary servicing for that area. Property itself is 2.55 hectares, which is a smidge over 6 acres, and has 42 meters of frontage on Bay Lane. And it's this stretch right here, which is the frontage. Don't put it on there. This is a shot looking northwest from the corner of Bay Lane, looking into the property. What I'd look for your direction, this is the extension of Bay Lane right down to the water. As you can see, it's substandard in size and whatnot going down to the water itself. And this is the boundary of the property and over here. And these are the property's heavily treed. There's an existing laneway, as I've already described for you, and existing dwellings. And what you see is what will be after the fact. So again, this is really just, and I'm going to be reiterating this a few times because at the neighborhood meeting, there was a lot of questions about what is the development that's proposed. That's what's proposed. There's no change to what exists today. The second photograph, just for reference, this is looking east from Bay Lane. So the property is behind the fence line in here, and it's the lighting in here kind of lose some of the detail. But as you can see, the property is well forested. And actually, if you didn't drive down Bay Lane or you didn't know the area, you probably would never know that it actually existed. All applications have to be consistent with the PPS and conform to the growth plan and the Lakes and Coast Protection Plan. In this case, as I've noted, there's no development, no physical development or site alteration proposed, no infrastructure proposed. So there's no natural heritage impact. There is no hydrologic impact, and there's no impact on Lake Simcoe. There has been a number of plans and reports submitted, quite a bit smaller list than normal, because again, no physical alteration is proposed on the site, but all of those reports and plans are available on the city's website and are available by any member of the public to review. And if they have any questions, they can forward on to the Development Services Project Manager, and if there's any extra help, I'm happy to assist. This is the city's official plan, which is your guiding document built out for 10 years. This is actually the former official plan because this is the document that was in effect at the time of the applications. As you can see, the property is in yellow. It's designated as residential, and the proposed land use is permitted. Residential land uses exist, and that's what's permitted in the official plan. Same color, same look, but just a slightly different description. Neighborhood area is the new official plan designation. Again, in the context of this application and conformity with the OP, there's not a whole lot of change in that respect. The lands are zoned RH, which is effectively, like a holding zone for a large older properties. And this dates back to the 60s when this group of individuals, which have changed somewhat over time, but this is a corporation that has a piece of land, and they've developed houses that started out as cottages. Some of them are used full time, but ultimately they're at the point now where if you're buying into this waterfront community, you have to buy shares in a corporation as opposed to buying a lot and getting a mortgage like every normal person would do. In this case, you actually have to get a commercial loan, and you have to buy shares in a corporation, and you just have a piece of the property you're allowed to use, but you actually don't own the land, you own the shares. So the whole purpose of this exercise is to transition from that historical commercial context to a subdivision with individual lots and a proper zoning framework that reflects that. And that's what this next shot shows, is that every one of the individual houses that exist, there would be a lot line drawn around it. There was a house on lot 3 that burnt down somewhere 10 plus years ago. But the intent of it would be to allow for reconstruction of a dwelling on that lot, should the zoning go through and be approved by council, and ultimately whether if staff were to approve the plan of subdivision. And then there is a third application called the Common Elements Condominium Plan. So this area in gray at the bottom, that's the access block. There's also a tennis court on there. The sanitary sewer and water line goes through there. The intent is that all of these freehold subdivision lots, if approved, would be tied to that common elements condominium. It's called a parcel of lot, a tied land, or a PODIUM, if you ever heard of that terminology before. So they would all be owning all of these 10 lots would be tied to this condominium block. The condo block would be owned as a single entity, but it would be everybody would own it collectively. As a result, it would be one unit in a condo plan, but everybody would own it collectively, and they would be responsible for joint maintenance. And I think at the neighborhood meeting, I tried to clarify, but I'm going to do that again today. The mere name of the word condominium conjures up apartment buildings and whatnot. That's not what's proposed. This is a condominium tenure for the sole purpose of maintaining the access block and a sanitary sewer and water main, and there's a tennis court, and there's some other recreational uses that develop on it, but it's not intended to be another actual, multi-residential development block, and the zoning wouldn't permit that. So that's all that's everything for my presentation, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. I will now call upon Logan Jeffermans, planner, to provide an update on the status of the application.
Further to Mr. Duhamel's presentation, please be advised again that planning staff are currently completing that technical review process and have received a number of comments from the different technical and external partners as well. And in relation to that, a neighborhood meeting, as has been mentioned, was held on June 23rd with 23 participants, including the ward councillor, Councillor Harris as well, in attendance. At that point in time, there's questions around points of clarification on the proposal, as Mr. Duhamel has mentioned, including if the application would result in redevelopment of the site, ownership and tenure of the properties, and clarification on the zoning proposed, as well as concerns with change in the area and additional traffic and waste along the existing Bay Lane Estates Road. So staff are currently reviewing the application before us for compliance with provincial planning policy, the appropriateness of the proposed or requested amendments and site-specific provisions related to that, in consideration of the waterfront and surrounding municipal open space. Additionally, we're also considering how the proposal complies with city standards and ensuring that there's appropriate water and sewer along that area. So a detailed analysis of these considerations and site-specific zoning provisions will be provided when a staff report is brought forward to general committee in the near term. Staff will continue to work with the applicant to address any feedback received through the public consultation, either today and through that public meeting, the neighborhood meeting, as well as comments raised through the analysis of this application by the different technical departments who have submitted their comments. These items may require some minor revisions or updates to the plans and reports submitted in support of this application. Staff report providing a recommendation to the general committee on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is anticipated to be brought forward in the fall. A concurrent plan of subdivision and plan of condominium exemption is being reviewed as part of this application and would not require staff recommendation to council. And prior to wrapping up, as Ray has also mentioned, I would like to remind the Affordability Committee and members of the public that all submission materials and key dates associated with this application are available online for viewing on the city's development projects webpage under Ward 8. Alternatively, you can always contact myself, the file manager, Logan Jeffermans, directly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who wish to provide comments? If so, please approach the podium and begin by stating your first and last name and your address for the record. Seeing none. We have one. Yes. Members of the public speaking virtually for this public meeting, please use the raise your hand function or press #9 on your phone to raise your hand and #6 to unmute yourself. I will ask that once a member of the public has joined the virtual meeting to speak on the matter, Please begin by stating your first and last name and your address for the record. I now invite Yi Gao, aka Gary, and Juan Fan's son. Hopefully, my apologies if I didn't get that correctly. To join us.
Oh, sorry. I don't think I raised my hand.
I beg your pardon?
I don't think I raised my hand. So if
Yes, no, you don't need to raise your hand. Just please go ahead.
oh, okay. So just to clarify, so okay, this is equal from 52 Brandon Avenue, and just to double check. So for the block 11, so there's a the condominium area there's no development. Is that right? I just want to confirm that.
Go ahead, sir.
Through you, Chair Nixon. I can confirm that, and as Mr. Duhamel's already mentioned, no development is proposed as part of this current application, particularly on block 11, which is the plan of condominium block.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, sir, if you're still there, could we get your address, please?
Address is 52 Brandon Avenue.
Very good. Thank you. Ward 8, Councillor Harris, do you have any questions or clarification?
Thank you, Chair Nixon. And thank you, Mr. Duhamel and Mr. Jeffermans. The only concern, and I won't have to ask the question because you covered it very well. No physical development, no alteration proposed. This is really, as I understand it, a exercise in modernizing the arrangement for the property owners and clarifying boundaries and such. So I really don't have any questions. If I understand it correctly, it's Mr. Duhamel is just sorting out the land in a more effective method, and no changes to be made on the properties or anything being added. So just confirming.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Committee Member Harris, that's correct. This is a strange arrangement that has worked well for them over a long period of time, but it's not particularly effective and efficient today, particularly in an advancing age of many of the owners like a more modern method of individually owning individual lots. And that's the purposes of that application effectively, the series of applications, just to allow for 10 single detached lots that'll be tied to a road and infrastructure, so that long-term use can exist on an individual basis as opposed to a collective as part of a corporation.
Great, thank you. Maybe because I'm curious, one question to staff. Is there a benefit to the city to have this arrangement updated and modernized in any way?
Through you, Chair Nixon, to Councillor Harris. The planning department gets really excited when these types of applications come in and we can really tidy things up. So maybe there's not necessarily a benefit, intrinsic benefit, but certainly tidying up these types of historic situations through a proper planning process is always a good thing in our opinion.
Great, thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. If anyone has any further written comments, you can submit them to Logan Jeffermans at logan.jeffermans@barrie.ca. There is one advisory committee report to be received. 6.1, report of the Heritage Barrie Committee dated April 25th, 2023. Can I have a member of committee put the report on the floor to be received?
I'll put the motion on the floor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, are there any questions from members of council in attendance? Seeing none. All in favor? Carried. There is one recommendation from the Heritage Barrie Committee report dated April 25th, 2023. Tax relief for designated heritage properties that staff and the Development Services Department in consultation with the Finance Department investigate the feasibility and timelines of a tax relief program for designated heritage properties and report back to the Heritage Berry Committee. Can I have a member of committee put the recommendation on the floor?
Open the floor. It's critical.
Councillor Harris, thank you. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none. Are there any questions from members of council in attendance? Councilor Morales.
Thank you, Chair Nixon. Obviously, I'm aware of the language that staff have to look into it, so I don't expect all the answers to come here today, but to either RGM, Bala, or oh, no, to our finance staffer. What could this possibly look like? I have lots of concerns with this. I didn't speak in 3 minutes ago because we were accepting their recommendation, but now it's on the floor to be adopted. So big difference now. But this seems problematic from a fairness perspective. If somebody has a heritage designated property, they may experience tax relief, whether that's a one-off or that's a consistent rate, whether they're protected from future tax increases, how that works seems a bit challenging from my perspective. So I wanted to, before doing the research, I wanted to at least let finance staff comment about how they may feel about this.
Through Councilor Nixon, Chair Nixon, to Councilor Morales. I am a staff member in the Development Services Department, not in finance. But I can provide a little bit of clarification on that, in that there's quite a bit of control from the municipality in terms of providing tax relief to designated heritage properties. And that is the purpose of doing additional investigation and to provide some direction to Heritage Berry Committee for consideration. Very generally speaking, heritage programs or tax relief programs for designated properties are sort of in perpetuity. As long as the building remains designated, those tax relief tax relief continues to be granted. But again, there is quite a bit of control by the municipality for how long, the amount, and things like that.
Perfect. And through you, Chair, next to my apologies on the wrong department. I know you're in planning. I was talking to somebody else in finance earlier. As the way the motion is written, does the staff have the flexibility to also consider one-off grants, I guess? So maybe the recommendation goes, we don't recommend a subsidy tax relief, it's really a subsidy, tax relief program in perpetuity, but maybe we recommend one-off, because the time value of money of something in perpetuity, 30 years, really is large. So would that be within your scope, or would there have to be an amendment to this motion for you to also maybe consider that?
Through Chair Nixon and Councilor Morales, I don't believe that is how this program operates. I do believe this is a program that is in place and continues to be in place for, like I said, in perpetuity. I believe a program that you're referring to would not fall under this purview of this program. It would be a different kind of program.
Okay, perfect. Chair Nixon, I had concerns about it. I don't have concerns at the moment, just because I very much trust our planning department. I have huge trust in them. So if you're telling me that there's lots of check and balances, I don't think you use that word, but ability to contain it, then so be it. And at this point, you're investigating it, and it might just come back saying, let's not do it. Or if you're going to do it, just know that you're getting down this rabbit hole. So thank you for that information.
Thank you, Councilor Morales. So, all in favor, motion carried. Report to committee, memorandum from A. Bradford Planner dated June 14, 2023 regarding heritage conservation districts. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee? Seeing none. Are there any questions or comments from members of council in attendance? Seeing none. Thank you. It is now 7:03 PM and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.